Good evening, everyone. This is Joe Core, Superintendent of Schools here. And we are back with our PAC meeting here for the end of November. I would be planning another PAC meeting for December 10. That would be 3 weeks from now. I think there'll be some more information and some more other items that we could tie together at that particular point in time. So I think without any further ado, Ms. Skills, why don't we go straight to our presentation tonight?
Certainly.
Okay, and I know it's been a while here, so for our audience, the Parents Advisory Council is a group of volunteers, your neighbors. It's parents and students who come together, who receive information on district operations and proceedings and provide input to such. So tonight, we're going to go over, we'll have Ms. Bongermino outline the New York State Travel Advisory for Thanksgiving break, just go over that information. We're also going to talk about the potential short-term schedule changes, so we'll cover a variety of items there. Ms. Gills will talk about the plan for individuals who want to change their instructional placement for semester 2. And then I will present state aid and updates and begin to frame the season 4 budget planning. So let's go to our first slide here. And Ms. Bongermino, so we may have individuals who are visiting family. And so would you please just review with us the New York State Travel Advisory regulations?
Absolutely, Mr. Core. Thank you. And hello, everyone. It's good to see you all. It's been a while. So yes, I wanted to briefly talk about the travel advisory and how it's different than it has been in the past. And just know that there is information on our website that details all of this and a flow chart. So don't feel you have to take copious notes. Their information is available, but we wanted to make sure that everybody had an overview in case you do decide to travel over the holiday break. So first and foremost, if you decide you wanted to travel within New York State, you want to go visit relatives out in Buffalo, that's totally fine. You can do that freely. You don't need to do anything. You don't need to report it. You can certainly just travel and do whatever you would like to do. If you decide to travel to one of the contiguous states to New York, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Vermont, or Connecticut, you again can do that freely and you don't need to do any kind of quarantining. But please check with the state you're traveling to, because we are hearing that some of these contiguous states have their own rules. So while New York may say that it's okay to travel back and forth, we're hearing that Vermont and Massachusetts have some quarantining on their side. So you really want to make sure that the state you're traveling to is, you know what their rules are. So what happens now if you say you want to travel outside of any of the states we just talked about? The threshold is now 24 hours. So if you choose to travel and you're going for less than 24 hours, you do have to do some things. So first and foremost, you do not need to quarantine when you come back, and you do not need to get a COVID test prior to coming back. However, once you come back to New York, you are required to fill out the New York State Traveler Form, which is linked on our website. And that's regardless if you're flying, you're driving, you're taking a bus, a train, it doesn't matter. If you're coming back into New York, you need to fill out that form. And then also, while you're not required to quarantine, on the 4th day back into New York, you are going to need to get a COVID test, and that test should come back negative. If you choose to travel for more than 24 hours, which is probably what most folks are thinking about doing for the holiday, when you travel, you need to take a COVID test prior to coming back to New York within 72 hours. So if you're there for a week, you need to plan that within that 72-hour period before you come back, you're going to need to get a COVID test. You don't need to have the results of that test. However, you do need to be able to establish proof that you did in fact take that test. Once you come back into New York, you're going to need to fill out that travel advisory form that we just talked about. So that's going to be a requirement. You're also going to need to quarantine for 3 days. So you come back, you fill out the form, you've already taken that test, you're quarantining for 3 days, and then on day 4, you need to take another test. And provided both of those tests come back negative, then you can go about your business. Just know that rapid tests are totally acceptable unless you are symptomatic. If you are symptomatic, then you need to fall into the how do I come back to school or how do I come back to work protocol that we have, where you have to get the molecular test and not the rapid. We do ask that if you are going to travel out of state, that you let your school's health office know, because we will be tracking those students and making sure that we have all of the documentation in order for the student to come back to school. And then we will also need to make sure that we have a copy of those test results as well. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Open to questions if you have any, but again, all of this guidance is going to be on the website, and there's some frequently asked questions as well, because it can get a little bit confusing.
And thank you, Jenna. And I would like to emphasize, as you already did, and Ms. Skeels did in the chat room as well, the rapid test is fine for travelers who are asymptomatic.
Correct.
You mentioned here that if you are symptomatic and returning from another state, then you jump into the other protocol. Karen had a question. No documentation if you quarantine for 14 days is my understanding.
That is true. So I'm sorry, I neglected to say that. So you do have the option of quarantining, coming back and quarantining for 14 days. You still have to fill out the traveler form, but you don't need to get tested. But this is the option to opt out. So this is like really the new thing, because the 14-day quarantine is really still the old rules. They just gave everybody an extra option, which is this test out.
And nothing is needed to return to school. There was a question there. What do we need to return to school?
If you're traveling and you have to get a COVID test based on how long you're away, the COVID test results need to be furnished to the health office.
And Brett just made a comment here. When we needed a test, we went to Newton Plaza for a PCR test, and the results were back in 24 hours. I believe they used LabCorp as the vendor who processed. That said, now the cases are up and those turnaround times may vary. I'd also like to mention too, the Walgreens on Holland Avenue in Albany. That's over near the VA, near Albany Medical Center. Those are extremely rapid. That's a self-administered rapid test. The results are sometimes back within a half hour or within an hour as well. So, that is another valuable source. You just reserve online. You make an appointment 3 days in advance. You go, stay in your car, take the test, and they will email you the results in a very short period of time.
Also in the guidance, we did also link to where you can get a test when you're out of state. So if you're not sure, you can just put in the zip code of wherever you're at, and it'll tell you the testing locations.
And, again, thank you very much, Ms. Bongermino, for that update. Again, we'd just like to emphasize per CDC and per New York State Department of Health that I know that this will be challenging over Thanksgiving, but it's really important that we all follow the guidance there in terms of large gatherings, that we make adjustments accordingly. We are all valuing our time in school together, and I think it's important that, we continue the great work that we've done as a school and community together to stay open and continue to provide the opportunities for our students to be educated during the pandemic, whatever form they choose, whether it be remote learning, hybrid learning, or in-person school. But that in-person and hybrid element of it, it's very important that people remember the guidance that has been given by the state and by the national government as well. Okay, Ms. Skills, we can go. And so we're going to talk about potential short-term schedule changes. We'll discuss the events of today, the closure of the high school in-person learning session and the shift to remote, snow days and delays, short-term 2-week building closures, either ordered by the governor or necessitated because of an outbreak. So we'll go to today. And Ms. Skeels, I know you are the point person on this, and Ms. Bongermino, you are our COVID coordinator, so certainly both of you feel free to interject at this point in time here. But so essentially, this is the shortened version of what happened today. So at about 30 minutes before our school buses were to begin their runs to pick up our high school's South students, those were the students who were in person today, that was the cohort. We were informed that a South student who was in school, and the student was in school on Tuesday, November 17, had tested positive for COVID-19. And as a result, this positive case would result or cause a number of South students to be direct contacts and to go into a 2-week quarantine. So we had a very short amount of time to make a decision. So we have a COVID response team. We met. We knew that on the time between the buses were going to roll and the start of school, we did not have time for us to contact all the students who were the direct contacts prior to boarding the bus, prior to coming to school. And so therefore we made the decision in an abundance of caution, and it was a consult with the Albany County Department of Health. We made the decision to transition to remote learning for that afternoon at the high school for that particular cohort. And that was a decision based on the fact that we needed the time to inform all impacted parties and have them begin their quarantine. So what does that mean in the long term? So it doesn't impact our K-3 program at the local elementary schools. It does not impact our 4-6 program at the middle school. It doesn't impact our 7th and 8th program, and it does not impact our North cohort. So as we stand right now, school we are operating tomorrow as expected, and we fully anticipate the high school South cohort will be in attendance on Monday. And I would like, again, we are entirely unaware, and there are no plans to shut down school after Thanksgiving and go entirely remote. That is a rumor. It is not based in fact. And I think, it's fair to say in our workings with the Albany County Department of Health, they do value students being in school. So the goal is to not shut us down. The goal is to be safe. And I think that's generally the direction that the state wishes to take as well. So we are planning right now that we will be in session after Thanksgiving. And we hope that everyone has a safe Thanksgiving, an enjoyable Thanksgiving, comes back ready to start school, and we proceed on December 22nd. Ms. Skeels, Ms. Bongermino, do you have anything you want to add to that?
That was an excellent summary. Thank you, Joe.
Okay. Ms. Skeels, okay, so weather delay schedule. So I think this is important. because our building schedules are as such, we will this year either have a 1-hour delay or our buildings will be closed. There will be no 2-hour delays this year. And you can understand that a 2-hour delay really doesn't make a lot of sense here. But if we have a weather delay due to inclement weather, K-6 students will be delayed one hour. So we will announce a 1-hour delay. 7th and 8th grade students will transition to remote learning for the day, and 9th through 12th graders will operate on a regular schedule. So that will be it. If it looks like it's going to be a longer than 1-hour day, then it would be another option. So let's talk about snow days. So if school is closed due to inclement weather, so we have 1 snow day available. So this was one of those years, because the schedule fell the way it did, that we have 183 days in our school schedule. That normally would mean that we would have 3 snow days available to us. However, if you remember back in the fall, there was the very bad storm that came through, and that caused a 2-day power outage at Southgate and Loudonville. So essentially, those have to be treated in the eyes of the of New York State as snow days. So we're down to 1 day, really, in 1 day left. Now, to be clear on it, if you wanted to look at, with the exception of Loudonville and Southgate, the other school buildings in the district would have their full accoutrement of snow days. But we, as a district, have never done a differentiated snow day closing. This school stays open, that school is closed. So we are operating on the belief that we have 1 snow day, and we will use that snow day. It's our intention to use it. It's our intention to use it if the weather is bad enough to use it as a traditional snow day, which means there would be no instruction, no remote instruction, no hybrid instruction, no in-person instruction on the snow day. But after that, because we are in a circumstance here where we would go below our mandated 180 days, and the schools in question, Southgate and Loudonville, would essentially be penalized on a per diem basis, which would amount to thousands of dollars of state aid lost per day. We are mandated to have a school day on those days. So we would have to move to remote instruction in order to avoid falling below the state mandated 180 days and jeopardizing state aid. So that is where we stand at this point in time. It's not that we are against giving snow days. It's just this is, of course, being 2020, the set of circumstances must deal with. We will certainly look at the situation, monitor it, and adjust perhaps as new information becomes available or as we continue to examine it going forward. But we do have a snow day available to us, and we would intend to use it in the traditional snow day manner, which would be to not have school if the weather presents in a way that is such that it's not safe for us to be on the road. So once we have used those 1 days, however, the option would be to go to some form of remote because we have to meet our required days. And so, Mr. Deneen, I believe you're on the call here. So the short-term 2-week transition to remote learning, you just want to comment on that, please?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. What you see on the slide is essentially what Bowed Hills just had to go through a couple of weeks ago. The slide just changed on me, but what we have is our primary and our intermediate times. So you'll see the 9 to 1:45 and 10 to 2:45 for K3 early and late. And then the same thing for 4 to 6, 9 to 2, 10 to 3. So we would have our regular school day as Owen are familiar with. The only change would be their specials would become asynchronous, like we do in remote. So that's how we would go in, should we have a short couple week remote learning due to, say, Department of Health, Lake Bout Hills.
And as we say, the transition to remote learning, it could be a short-term closure. It could be closure of one school. All of those are possibilities. Mr. Deneen, Brett Bax just commented to everyone that, let me go back here to the chat, that felt that the plan worked well in Bout Hills, and was very grateful to the work done by the teacher in that circumstance.
And it's good to hear, and as was noted, when that closure did happen, these are families who did not choose remote, so they had to make adjustments, and the teachers also, they have to learn. It's hard. It's a hard transition, so I'm glad that the Bout Hills work paid off. And again, teachers will learn and adjust for families, just like families will learn and adjust in their own homes, so that it's a partnership. But every day we work, we learn more.
Yeah, no, it worked out, obviously not ideal. You always want the kids in school, but the communication was good, especially with the teacher using their whatever our teacher uses, Blooms or whatever. It was asynchronous, so plenty of breaks, to get away from the iPad, grab a snack. I mean, the Chromebook, grab a snack. So yeah, no, it again, not ideal, but they made the best of it, and the teachers did a great job. Same with Mr. Piccioni.
Good.
And so this would be the 7th and 8th grade schedule transitioning to remote learning. Mr. Champlin, you're on the phone here, I believe, or on the call. If not, I will handle it. Okay, so essentially for 7th and 8th grade, in the event of a short-term closure, we'll continue to follow the current remote schedule. And essentially the thinking was, if we just jump to a 2-week and then jump back, or we jump out for a few days, we would not want to invoke a completely different schedule. So we would want to stay with a schedule with which students are most familiar. In the hybrid program, students in the 7-8 program would join their morning classes, periods 1 through 5 virtually. So they would follow their regular schedule, only virtually. And students would, again, there would be break times. They have an access period where they can have a band period, an instrumental period. They can get extra help. They can get additional services, such as English language learning or special education. Or there's a study period or extra help period if they need that for those classes. The schedule would have the built-in break, and it would be a screen break that would go from 11 to 12:40. And then students would join the afternoon virtual classes. Those are periods 6 through 9, as they typically would, from 12:40 to 2:35. So basically, this short-term 2-week or less transition schedule mirrors that of the hybrid day that the students have now, where they come in the morning and then they go and they have their virtual learning in the afternoon. And Mr. Deneen, do you want to go back to the, this would be a long-term closure, so not something we aspire to, but
Sure.
not something we're planning to go to, because It's happening. It's in case. So I want to stress that. It's
Yeah.
in case. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Kaur. In our thinking, this is worst case scenario because we want students in school. We believe it's important. Should something happen and we find ourselves all remote for a long term, we've gotten together and started to talk about how could that and would that look. We did talk about still looking at the same schedule or a similar schedule to what we do in person now. And here's the biggest reason why. We do have built-in special education support and ENL support, and those services are shared in many buildings and hallways. So that's one of those pieces that we want to keep intact to the degree we can. However, we're interested in bringing, if we were long-term, the early and late schools to one schedule, for example, rather than have the two different schedules. We'd be interested in looking at a part of the week, say a Wednesday afternoon, going asynchronous so that we would have time for potential support, small group support, potential collaboration between teachers, and frankly, and going back to a comment just made earlier, some reduction of screen time. So, a full week, all day synchronous learning, it's a lot of screen time. So we've been discussing potentially looking at a Wednesday afternoon as a relief to that potentially. And we're looking at a way with our special area supervisors. Yes, right now they're asynchronous should we go to a 2-week closing, for example, or right now they're asynchronous in our remote program. But long-term, if we were in that situation, how could we start to move to having live experiences for those students who just cherish art, PE, music, library? And that's part of our most recent discussion. I will tell you for Ms. Keogh that regardless of that discussion and how we look to get live special area classes, band, orchestra lessons, those would always be live from the jump, that just like they are in our remote school. That wouldn't change, and that's important to let families know. But those are a few of those things that we're discussing. How do we get on one schedule? What part of the week might be asynchronous for some work to get done? And how would we move from asynchronous to some synchronous live experiences so that we can continue those relationships between special area teachers and our students, and those bridges get built because they're important. They're important now, and they will be important moving forward. So those are the conversations we're having as an elementary principals group in looking to this potential. Thank you.
Mr. Deneen, and I don't know whether you know the answer for this one specifically yet, but Tabassum adds the system even more. We need more special education staff remote, in my opinion. The asynchronous special area remote has been done very well done, very fun stuff.
Lisa, yeah, that's a really good point. So we've been working with Mr. Deneen and also Ms. Willman, who's our supervisor of special education. And, we've tried to reorganize some of our grade levels so that we can kind of prioritize and make that more efficient from the standpoint of communicating with the general education teachers so that it's not as spread out and we're not communicating with several different grade levels. So what we're trying to do is really look at the organization of our special ed services and then try to be more efficient and narrow the focus so that we can really support our students the best we can. And, to remind everyone, those IEPs were written for in person, and we're really at this point taking a look to see how we can potentially adjust some of those services. For example, if a student was going to receive an hour of consultant teacher services in ELA in person, right now consultant teacher services don't mean the same thing in the virtual world. So we may look to provide more of a breakout session resource room type of model to better support students in the virtual world. So we're having those discussions, and we're really looking to reassess and make sure that we're providing services the best we can for our virtual students as well. So we are having those conversations, and we look forward to, better organizing supports and services for our virtual students as well. Thank you.
And in the chat room, Renee has a question, which is a very good transition question. And her question is the short-term remote plan for junior high and high school something that can turn into a long-term plan as well? Or will the remote plan change for junior high and high school for long-term should the need arise? So let's go to our next slide. And that is a good point, Renee. So that's currently under construction, and we're working within the following parameters. So again, what we're talking about here is if we should have a longer than 2-week closure at the secondary level. So we would be currently developing class period length, the number of classes which would meet per day. So, give you an example of what that might mean. And I know Mr. Murphy's here, and Mr. Murphy, certainly feel free to add on as we go forward here. But, what we would want to consider, would it be an every other day schedule of 4 classes, one day, 4 classes the next day, longer in length, or would we work on having all the classes meet in one day for a specific period of time, shorter? Would we be combining the North and South cohorts for virtual learning? So would they be would the 2 cohorts be combined into one class? And would we, essentially condense the school day so that the school day doesn't end around 4 o'clock, but it ends more around the time to which we're accustomed, somewhere in the vicinity of 2:15 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Mr. Murphy, do you have anything you want to add here?
Thank you, Mr. Cord. Just that short-term or long-term, we do see combining the North and South cohorts as an opportunity to continue on with that instruction, but then also giving us an additional day when that one cohort would have been meeting, whereby teachers can have an opportunity to give extra help, meet with students through office hours, and have that time that we've really not enjoyed with this hybrid schedule as we did before we had to go into this type of schedule. So that's definitely a big plus if we do have to go remote, either long-term or short-term. As Mr. Core said, for long-term, we're still looking at that because there's a lot of moving parts as far as when it comes to the 2,000 or so students at the high school, and then also making sure that it's going to work in combination with our 7th and 8th grade program as well, where we're already sharing many teachers.
So when we come back together as a PAC on December 10, we will have a more finalized version of what a potential long-term schedule could look like. And now I will turn it over to Ms. Skeels, who will discuss the second semester option to change instructional models, and she will review timeline and process to switch children from remote to in-person or in-person to remote learning. Ms. Skeels.
Thank you, Mr. Core. So as we had talked about this summer, we were asking people to commit to one of the 2 models for the semester. And at the semester break, people could choose to switch the instructional model for their children. And so what we'll be doing is a survey, and you only have to complete the survey if you want to change your child's placement. So we will try to say that as many times as possible between now and when the survey comes out on Monday, November 30th. So the survey will be advertised in the superintendent's letter this Friday. And we know, obviously, to try to do something right before Thanksgiving is probably not a good idea. So the information will go out again on Monday, November 30th, and people have that week until 4 p.m. on Friday, December 4th to return the survey, again, only if they want to change their child's placement. And the survey will simply ask your child's name, your name, who's completing the form, what grade your child's in, And then it'll simply say, you have to choose one of the two options. I want to move my child from in-person to remote, or I want to choose to change my child from remote to in-person. If you choose that option, one more question will pop up that will ask you if you want school transportation. So on that survey, we'll quickly assess and be able to start processing those. Now, truthfully, the last two bullets on this slide are the most important, I would say. We really don't have any expectation as to how many families may want to change. If you had asked us a month ago, we really would have said very few. People went through the difficult process of making the decision and what would work best for their families back in August. And most families are really happy with what they've chosen because it's meeting the needs for their families. However, we have seen recently, obviously, increased numbers of cases in Albany County. We don't know what that will look like after Thanksgiving, and that may sway more people to move from in-person instruction to remote, but we just don't know. We don't know who's tired of remote and wants to have kids in school to get more socialization. So one of the things we have to say, and one of the reasons we're asking for this information so early, is we will need to go through and balance classroom placements again. And that may or may not result in changes, first of all, to transportation routes, depending on how many kids will be on a bus, because we still need to maintain social distancing, but it also may result in a change to a classroom roster. We really have no way of getting around that. If there is, and obviously probability says this is very unlikely, but if there were a classroom in the elementary with 14 students right now, and for whatever reason, 10 of those 14 students moved over to remote instruction, it's not helpful for the 4 students who are remaining to be in a class of 4. So we're really going to need the time to plan. The same thing at the secondary level. Obviously, we have many more sections of each subject at the secondary level, and we need to adjust. We may need more teachers in person. We may need more teachers remote. So that will take some time, and we need to build that. So when we hit the second semester, which is the first day of February, February 1st, we want everything ready and ready to go smoothly. So it may seem to you that, wow, they're asking so early. They're asking by December 4th, but with the amount of time it takes us to work through the rosters, our student management system, balancing, making sure we have the right information from all families, then it will be really important for us to have that extra time. So we appreciate your help with that. We will also, obviously, when we send out the survey, send out a review, because if you've been remote, you may have forgotten what the in-person schedules were. So we'll show you what the in-person schedules looked like. And same thing, if you are in person and you're like, oh, I can't remember, what does the elementary remote day look like? We'll share that. And the same thing for the junior high remote day and the senior high remote day, so that parents will have the information in front of them as they look at the survey. And again, if you're happy and you're keeping your child's placement, you don't need to do anything. If you do want to change your child's placement, we want you to have as much information as possible. So these are the schedules you all saw back in August when we were getting ready for going back to school. We just want to make sure we have those included right with the survey, so it's very easy for parents to look at all the information and make the best and most informed decision. We also welcome if parents want to call the school. You can call your homeschool principal if you have questions, or if you just want to talk something through. We know these are challenging times. We know families have all kinds of stressors. We answered a lot of calls in August, and we're happy to do so. And we say the same for November and December. If you need to talk with us, please feel free to reach out. If we can shed light on something that you're considering, we're happy to do so.
So Ms. Skeels, and I think, again, to the important point to remember here, as you stated, is you only fill out a survey if you are requesting a change of learning platform. If you want to come in person or want to go to hybrid from remote, or you want to move from those two latter venues into remote. That's the important thing. Not everyone fills out, only those who want to make a change.
Correct.
And Ms. Skeels, we're here right now, and Renee, I'm going back to the previous part of the presentation on short-term closures. And I can certainly help out here. And but what metrics will be used to reopen after a short-term and a long-term closure? So you may have seen the governor designating certain zones based on the rate of infection as a yellow zone, an orange zone, or a red zone. The one we are most concerned about right now, because of the rise in cases in Albany County, and we are over that 3% threshold. We're pushing that threshold in Albany County, and that would put us in a yellow zone. So previously, to get out of a yellow zone or to operate when you're designated a yellow zone, you had to test 20% of your in-person school population, students, faculty, and staff every week. The state has subsequently backed off that. So now if you test 20% and the 20% of the school population is below that 3% rate, that county rate, you don't have to repeatedly test. So that's quite fortunate. And right now, Capital Region BOCES is working on some regional solutions to allow schools to test. So there is one example of a metric. But Ms. Scales, I would say that it's fair to say here that, when we look at those metrics, we are in constant consultation with the Albany County Department of Health. And, essentially, usually the closures have been for 2 weeks following a quarantining period. Not always such, but usually 2 weeks. And I would think it's fair to say, too, that the county tends to be precise in analyzing the impact of a closure, that they are looking to keep students in school as best they can, safely, in the most, that's their paramount concern, student safety. However, I think it's usually a period of around 14 days. Do you have anything you want to add to that as a metric?
I would, yes, Mr. Core. So I think something that's the formula for the yellow, red, orange zones and clusters is actually pretty complicated, and take everything from New York City out of your mind, because they're operating in a completely different system down there. So for us, what it is, as Mr. Core said, he mentioned the 3%. But it is that the rolling average, the 7-day average is 3%. So they look back, it's a 7-day look back. It's 3% or more for at least 10 days. So they keep looking at the 7-day average of the 7-day average, 7-day average, and you have to hit that for at least 10 days. And in addition, you have to have at least 12 new positive cases per day per 100,000 residents. So it's a pretty complicated formula to look at from a distance. So I know we hear now, like, the state rate is about 2.8%. Our regional rate is about 2.4% right now. Remember, the capital region is not the same as Albany County, and it goes by regions. So that metric is incredibly complicated, and we will be told by the state when at the point at which we have entered into that. So we are trying to monitor that, but I want to be clear that is a very complicated formula. And I think people just hear the 3%. It reminds me of like the 2% tax cap. It's really not 2% at all. The 3% is not really 3% at all. It has all these stipulations. In terms of if it's a 2-week closure, for example, as we had to do with Bout Hills, that was done, as you well know, because we started to see community spread within that building. And we monitored that every day with Albany County to see if additional cases were coming in. We had every indication that 2 weeks would be the 14-day quarantine period that should have quelled any community spread. In fact, we're happy to report, obviously, as you know, that it did do so, and we have not had additional flattened out. So if it were something that was related to an outbreak in a particular school, that would be done hand in hand with Albany County. If it's a closure, that would be done hand in hand with the governor's office.
And Brett had a question, and then we have a couple of the, Brett stated, do we go off the county rate? No, we use regional rates. However, there could be micro clusters within a region that could be determined on zip codes, so that you could have orange and red segments within a yellow zone. That's very plausible as well.
So it is possible. Now we're a pretty tight geographic district, obviously, compared to some others that are spread out far more, but it is certainly possible. And you see this in Western New York right now, where a school district has some schools that are totally open and other schools that are either in a yellow, orange, or red, depending on how far spread out they are. So is it possible that, About Hills could be in a zone that Loudonville's not in, as our two schools that are farthest apart? It's possible, but geographically we're still pretty tight, but it is certainly possible. That is the goal that they're really trying to narrow in on and avoid whole scale kinds of closures. And hopefully the virus is contained enough in our region, and all the measures we're taking as a community are working, that we won't get there, but that is certainly possible.
And Jenna Myers had a question. If someone at the high school level, Mr. Murphy, you also feel free to comment here, wants to temporarily go remote, is that possible within the current schedule?
It is. We're taking it as a case-by-case basis. Going from hybrid to remote is a little bit easier because it does not involve space in classrooms. We are, we've been encouraging parents to make that decision at that deadline that was just outlined by Mr. Court earlier. But certainly if there's special circumstances, like students that are being quarantined, obviously, for any reason, we're making those decisions. Going from remote to hybrid is a little more challenging, because then we have to look into our physical space and see how that looks each and every time, each and every class.
So I think the question is, and then Renee followed up with a great question, Jenna, what about the junior high and elementary schools too? Some parents want to keep students home to be cautious. How can these students continue classes? So we understand that concern. Okay, it is only the high school was at the high school load. And have a separate remote school like we do K-8. So in answer to the question, it is easier for a student to move from remote to in-person in 9/12, but we are really going to have to stick by the plan for that change at K-8 to be made at the requested time at the semester break in February. It is a question of facility size. It's a question of capacity really to do that. So we don't have the flexibility, nor does anybody really at K-8 to do that, to allow that to happen. So, and at the same time, Mr. Murphy too, I don't think you are saying here that you're encouraging random jumping back and forth by students from.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying that there have been some cases where we've made exceptions just because of some rules that we have to enforce around contact tracing and in other situations. But no, for the most part, we are trying to keep those numbers consistent until parents respond to the survey that's upcoming.
Karen had a question here, or a comment actually. I have two thoughts, and you decide if it's appropriate to broadcast a response. So I think it's certainly worthy of a discussion point. One point, Has there been any thought to have students sign a pledge to continue to adhere to safe COVID protocols over the holiday break? And 2, what about ramifications to families who knowingly do not comply with testing, quarantining, and it causes an issue? I know of a situation in Florida whereby a few families were forced to go remote until January due to them ignoring directives. So we really don't have that prerogative to force families into quarantining or force families in from in-person to remote. Again, let me backtrack a little bit. I would not want to say that as an absolute. So if someone knowingly endangers someone else in this circumstance, I think that is another set of circumstances which could actually compel us to ask someone to go to a remote learning circumstance. But that's something that has to be done with great care, great consideration. Having students sign a pledge to continue to adhere to safe COVID protocols over the holiday break. We have not thought about having a pledge. It's not necessarily a bad idea, but we have certainly emphasized with our students, the need for safety and for them to be part of a community and to recognize the fact that their actions outside of school impact a community. I don't want to necessarily put you on the spot, Michaela, but here it goes. I mean, how do you feel? What do you think the sense is with students out there? Do students realize the importance of their actions outside of school and their impact on possibly putting us into a quarantine period for 2 weeks? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think for the most part, especially as a senior, we all, last year we got taken out of school in March. We just want to have as much of a normal senior year as we can. So I think people definitely do want to be in school. That being said, I don't think that fully means that people aren't maybe not doing exactly what they should be at all times. So I definitely think the idea of really having people pledge to really take care of each other and do the right thing would not be a bad idea. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the entire student body, but I would not personally be opposed to signing something like that. Especially so, not only, we know right now that everything is so uncertain, but if that means, the last few months of the school year, we can have a normal year, a normal senior year and kind of closure to everything, I would be fully for that.
Mr. Kaur, I just would also like to add, and Michaela, thank you, that we also have to remember that our students, even though our high school students are young adults, they're still bound by many of their parents' and families' actions, which we know that as we read and listen to the national news, families are taking different looks at this virus and reacting in different ways. So I would not want to put too much on our high school students with a pledge like that, even though I have students like Michaela who I know can make that pledge and follow through with it.
I think, we would have, I think certainly it brings to mind, it puts present in everybody's mind the notion that we are in this together and our actions outside have a meaningful impact on inside the school. We could not enforce, however, the fact that if a student refused to sign a pledge, we could not exclude that student from school legally. Karen points out also that the state will fine you up to $10,000 if you don't comply. Dina had a question here I just missed. If we do hit yellow, do you feel at this point the school could comply with the testing and continue to stay open? Great question. So at present, okay, we are not a testing center. We are not equipped to test. We don't have the personnel who have the certification for testing. That could happen, but the regional BOCES for the 24 schools within the region is committed to setting up a program and a protocol and setting up a means by which this testing could take place regionally. So I think we will have that capacity at some point. But that would be something to get back in touch with you on the 10th of December or earlier if we have it as well. Karen states, in my mind, it would be a general set of statements. This would be the pledge, not specific, which could be out of the student's control. Certainly something we could think about and consider. Okay, so I'm going to shift to a non-COVID topic right now, and this is the second impact, but a very profound and very serious and perhaps long or maybe even longer lasting impact of COVID, and that's state aid, what we know now and what we will need to plan for. And what we know now, typical to COVID times here, is quite possibly going to be different from what we may know in a week or in a day or the like. I also would like to note too that Mr. Scott Hoot, our Assistant Superintendent for Business, is on this call, and I would welcome any additional comments that he would want here. So want to make here. So let's go to the first slide. And so our New York State Department of Budget predicts a $15 billion budget gap for the 2020 school year. When we started the budgeting process pre-COVID back in January, the budget gap was around $6 billion, and we have increased that by 2.5 times. And the Department of Budget is going to release a state reduction plan to the legislature by the end of December. So this could be cuts, immediate cuts, and cuts for the future. So what are we experiencing right now in terms of our budgeting process and our revenues? So we do not have another stimulus package. That's still being considered, being debated within the Congress. And the Department of Budget is giving some of our aid payments at 100% and some at a full 20% reduction or only 80%. So we have to consider this year's current 20% cut in state aid and look at what has happened now, and we'll illustrate what has happened already and what could possibly occur. So just to review, there are 3 sources of funding for schools in New York State, and we'll give you the New York State average for a school revenues pie graph and what North County's is as well. So federal aid and grants is relatively small. In schools in New York State, it represents 4% on the New York State average, but that is 2% for North County. When you need every single asset to be fully operational in your school, 2% is significant. State aid and grants. So state aid, that is for New York State, that compiles 41% of the revenue part of the budget. In North County, it is 24%. And local property taxes constitute 50%, 55% on the average for the state, but they constitute 74% for North County. And we'll get into that in a bit. But basically, the payments that were to be entered into the system, these are the payments that we receive in July and August. They were subjected to a 20% withholding. And so the experience we have right now is that we have $325,000 that has been currently withheld from the district. So just, quick overview here, very broad brush. State aid is calculated. There are two big ways we determine how much aid we get. One is called foundation aid, and the other is the expense-driven aid. So we'll look at foundation aid first, and how foundation aid works. So this is the formula that determines how much foundation aid a school district gets. So it's a formula. It's based on multiple factors. So how many students you have. It's based on attendance. It's based on enrollment. The grade level of the students, how they're segmented out. Secondary students are aided higher than elementary students. The number of special education students is also factored into the formula. They are aided higher than general education students. English language learners are aided higher than general ed students. If you have an academic summer school, and the number of resident and non-resident students, all those are part of the factor. In addition to that, we have district wealth. So this is based on the combined wealth ratio. So the wealth ratio is based on 50% of the total property wealth within the district entity, and the 50% of the total income based upon the taxable income of the individuals who reside within the district. So when you look at what is the profile here, the state has determined that 1.0 is average. So if your district wealth ratio is 0.8, you are below average. If it's 1.4, which is approximately what ours is, then you are wealthier than the state average. And I can just tell you an interesting story that I have on the wealth ratio. My colleague down in Green Island from a few years back called me up in a panic because Green Island is a very small village. It's about 3/4 of a mile with, at best, maybe a couple of thousand residents. In that one year, someone had hit the lottery for $100 million. And so he was justifiably concerned about that because that would abnormally skew the wealth of Green Island that year. So that gives you kind of a little bit of a anecdote there to, see that, income, wealth, property wealth are all used as factors to determine this. Poorer districts receive more state aid and wealthier districts receive less state aid. We are a high resource, low need district. So we are in the wealthier group. Also, there are other categorical aids. There's aids for textbook, computer software, hardware aid, high tax aid, and they are all driven by the enrollment of the school. So that's just an overview of that. So foundation aid is in one category. The other category of aid is expense-driven aid. And that's essentially on, what did you spend? And then you will get aided on a portion of that. And so building aid. So right now, this is very much a part of where we are. Once projects are approved, completed, and final cost reports are submitted, building aid will begin to flow. We don't receive building aid on simple maintenance and repairs. So when you paint the building, you don't get aid on it. And right now, up until the 2019-20 school year, building aid has never been cut. There is some concern that it will be capped or cut at this point in time. The same is also true for transportation aid. So that's based on the day-to-day operation of transporting students to and from a school. We've never cut transportation aided costs. Again, there's talk about capping it. And particularly important is the fact that essentially from mid-March on last year, we were not transporting students, but we were transporting meals, school supplies, computers. And so, the question now is, how will the state aid this? And 19 and 20 is still under discussion. And, there's a possibility that they may choose to dramatically reduce a portion of that aid to consider not aiding from mid-March on. BOCES aid, we are aided at BOCES, so any service we purchase through BOCES is, we get 50% of the cost of that back. BOCES has an administrative cost, which is about 6 to 8%, but that still is a wonderful support. So we buy it in this school year, the aid flows on that in the following school year. And students with disabilities, so high cost students are done in something called a stack. That's weighted in the foundation aid, but there's also additional aid for students who may require more intense services or special placement. That is above the foundation aid formula allotted for each special education student. And one of the questions that we have right now, we get aid for students who need a one-to-one aid. In the pandemic, during the remote, obviously this circumstance was changed. So now the question is begged, will the state not aid the one-to-one aid from mid-March on? So again, we've been saying this throughout this part about the expense-driven aid. There's talk in the governor's office for many years of trying to cap these aids, and it has been resisted thus far. But there is a concern that in the upcoming budget, these expense-based aids will be capped. So essentially, and some of you on the PAC may remember from the budget presentations back in the spring, this year the Department of Budget was given the authority to reduce funding to local governments, and that includes school districts during the look back period. So if revenues are falling short or if expenditures are excessive, and oddly enough, both are possibilities here. If you take a look at the fact that we are in a recession/depression, sales tax revenues are way down. Yet at the same time, school districts, for example, are compelled to buy more cleaning supplies, hire more custodians. In our case, actually, we hire some personnel to provide coverage because coming in remote or coming in person in a socially distanced environment is very labor intensive. So the look back periods will be critical from the state to determine how much aid flows to schools. The long-term picture is rather grim. The state is figured to be $62 billion short through 2024. And the difficult part is for us in our budgeting process is the bulk of school aids paid in March, but March is a time where we really are finishing our budgets. So if the Department of Budget waits to make that decision in March, it could really compound the difficulties of this budgeting season. So if we look at a 20% reduction in funding for schools, that's about 5 billion statewide. That would take us back to the 2014-15 levels. And continuing that reduction into 21-22 would take us back 12 years, 09-10. And that was the year of the Great Recession as well. So a bad year to go back to. So I think the question we are dealing with right now is how are resources going to be distributed equitably with a permanent cut to school funding? So in our perspective, we're a low needs district. So will the state, in attempt to be equitable, take a higher percent greater than 20%, in other words, of our aid than a neighboring high needs school district who relies more heavily on state aid? We don't know the answer to that question yet. But here's a graphic that shows you what we mean. So Schenectady is a high needs, low resource district. They get $138,573,051 in state aid. The impact of a 20% cut would be about $27,714,610. That comes out to a cut of almost $3,000 per pupil, $2,899. North County, we're low needs, high resource. The 20% cut would be off of 23,206,444. So instead of 27 million, it would be 4.6 million. And that per pupil cut would be $777. That's a substantial and massive impact on us. For Schenectady, it's unthinkable. So the question then becomes, how will the state handle this discrepancy? Will they take more from us to mitigate the impact on Schenectady, or does 20% mean a 20% arbitrary cut across the board? No one knows the answer to that question yet. And I hate to be grim, but you know, this is sort of the budget landscape as we see it right now. It's a difficult environment in which to plan because we are lacking in specifics. The one generality we know is that it is not good. So as we get further into the budget season and as we get more information here, we certainly will keep you informed. In a normal year, we start our open budget meetings on the 1st of March. But we will try to, we work with our Board of Education constantly throughout the year. And we will also work to keep our PAC updated on the budget scene as we see it. So at that point, do we have any questions on budget or on any part this evening at all? Renee wants to know, how many remote learners can our district currently support? Are we running at full capacity? We are pretty much at full capacity. Mr. Deneen, do you want to talk about the elementary program K-6?
Sure, I agree with you. We're about running at full capacity. For example, we don't have any seats in fourth grade or in third grade. And in truth, this week, I'd say in the past 6 or 7 days, we've had so many remote requests that I started talking to parents this week about we're unable to move you to remote at this time, but like Mr. Corris talked about, the survey comes out November 30th. By all means, should you want to move to remote in the second semester, that would be your next option. So yeah, we have full classes from kindergarten to 6th grade, and frankly, many services that go with those students as well in both ENL and special education. So we're, like you said, we're just about full there.
And I would ditto that for the secondary as well. Jen has a contact tracing question. Once everyone is contacted by the Albany County Department of Health, can a message go out that everyone has been contacted who is affected? I think there are lots of parents waiting for a call and wondering if and when it will come. Ms. Skeels is our liaison with the Albany County Department of Health. Do you want to talk about that process, Ms. Skeels?
I absolutely do. So that is actually a process that is, I'm going to actually stop sharing. That is actually a process that has changed just within this last week as the number of cases has increased throughout the region. So for school-based contacts, we as the district are now the full lead on the investigation. So if we find out that there is an employee or a student who tests positive, we do the work of establishing, okay, who were the other children in the class? Did the child go to CYC? Was the child on the bus? What other teachers were in the classroom besides the classroom teacher? We compile that full list of contacts. We cross-reference it against who was absent that day. For bus rides, there are a lot of kids who are signed up for buses, and even though they were in school, but mom or dad dropped them off. So we actually call every family to say, was your child on the bus on such and such a date? We cross them off so we get the best list possible. We then, starting now, turn that over to Albany County, who then immediately moves that to New York State contact tracing system. So what happens is once we move that, we, employees of the school district, administrators of the school district, actually make all those calls to let you know you will be getting a call. So we have, in every case we've had thus far, with a team of people working, we've been able to make all those calls on the same day. We want people to have the information. Obviously, when the contact tracers call, they go over all the information in the final way with you in the official way. But we have a protocol now and a script that we go through with everybody. In the example today, the high school principals worked. They had everybody called within a couple of hours. So at this point, because we're doing the calling, Jenna, to your question, we can pretty much say you'll get a day of call from us, which will give you all the information, and then it gets formalized after the fact when you get a contact tracer call. And that is the person who will check in with you each day of the quarantine. As we talked about earlier, they'll check in on your symptoms to see if you're asymptomatic or if you had symptoms, if you're getting worse. They will check in to make sure you're staying at home to see if you have any questions about quarantining and facilitate any help that you might need if you need to get to a test or something like that, and give you locations and things like that.
And I think Ms. Skeels, to the point you just made here, Brett in the chat room indicated that Mr. Petroni called before Albany County DOH called because of lag time, and we're very appreciative and glad to see that's being expanded. You know, the county.
I'm sorry, Mr. Core. They did implement this new system so that hopefully there won't be such a great lag time. So for example, what I can tell you is since we started, depending on whether it was at the very beginning, I was literally faxing them things. Then I were taking it all down. And then what happens is somebody at Albany County Department of Health would listen to all that. They would have to input that all. Then somebody else had to double check it. And then they would start the call. So you can imagine there's us, there's Albany High, that's a giant high school. There's Guilderland, there's South Colony. There are tons of big school districts in Albany County. And so in that way, for them to have to do all the double checking, it got really behind as the cases started coming on. So this way, we have a template, we fill it out, we provide the information, we check it against our Infinite Campus database so that we have the most. So our parents have to continue to update phone numbers and things like that. And then we send it to them, and then they automatically upload it to the contact tracers. So they do think you will start to get calls more quickly. They've hired more contact tracers at the state now who are coming on to work afternoon and evening shifts as well as weekend shifts. But with us, we will, depending on when we hear the case, obviously, if I just learned something tonight, you're not going to hear about it till tomorrow. But once we know, when that letter goes home saying there was a case, we have been successful in reaching out to all families by the end of the day.
And I think it goes without saying, Albany County has been a terrific partner with us throughout this process.
Unbelievable, unbelievable.
Renee has a question in the chat room. If a child is symptomatic, instead of a rapid test and then a PCR test, can students just get a PCR test done?
Yes.
Lisa has a question. Question today I saw on Facebook, for a situation like today in grade 4 through 6, can the specific school be shared? It will be a relief for parents who may have a child in K3 who may have been on the bus. Right now, all K3 are left wondering. Example, for Bout Hills, we knew which school folks wanted to know why they couldn't know for grades 4, 6.
So we absolutely could. So what we always balance is obviously the person's right to privacy. So if whatever the case were, if it were only, 4 people, we're obviously not going to say, because then people could be like, is it this one, or this one? But something like that, if we said associated with this building, or excuse me, this school at the intermediate building, I think we could say that. There were no bus impacts on this case, though, I can tell you that.
And Jenna, maybe that could be included in the message when sent out. You will be notified at the end of the day.
That's a good point, because we did change the letter today, because today with the high school case was the first time it reflected this new process. So we did put in the letter that you would be called by a North Colony building administrator or some language like that. So I think to say you should expect to be called by the end of the day if you were a direct contact. Great suggestions. Thank you.
To Boston, is the high school open tomorrow for hybrid learners? Yes, it is. And then a shout out to our local health department, and kudos to all the school staff involved in contact tracing. Please show them your appreciation if contacted. Thank you. Renee, if we get designated to the yellow zone, would we close or do testing? Do you have the capacity to do testing? So right now, today, tomorrow, if we were designated a yellow zone, we do not have the capacity. No one in the region has that capacity. We are working to develop that capacity. So our goal is to be able to stay open and develop that capacity, and that's what we're working on regionally right now, because it really is a regional solution.
Because there is a process in order to give the test at the school, you have to be licensed so if each individual school were doing it, we would have to go through an application process with New York State to be licensed to be able to do that testing. So we do believe if we have a regional solution, it will be able to fast track and will be able to respond more quickly as a region than if we as individual school districts, I should say, we're trying to get that same application approved.
So who will be a part of the 20% that gets tested, and who will decide who gets tested? It can be random. It can be any part of the 20%. It doesn't have to be 20% staff, 20% students. It could be 90% staff and 10% students. So it could be any number that constitutes 20% of the in-person students. When will students be tested? That would be to be determined. We're not there yet. Who will test them? Okay, so one possibility is there is a registered nurses could take, so they could be individuals who would test. The advantage of going with the regional approach would be that there would be a contract with an agency so that our nurses would not have to have that responsibility, because they have enough responsibilities doing the job of being a school nurse during COVID-19, which is enormous. So how will they be tested? I think some of the thinking is that there was a nose swab that I think could be self-administered, and that would be put in a test kit, and results could be available in as few as 15 minutes. This was what was being discussed regionally today. Is it in the budget to do this? No. However, we do have, we did allot about $500,000 in the budget for COVID-19 related expenses. Dina, how about an easy question? I'm up for easy questions. When will the junior high and high school report cards be posted? Mr. Murphy.
High school report cards are being posted no later than Tuesday next week. We're just finalizing the grades.
And I can't give you the exact, but the junior high is about at that time as well. Lisa, please know many parents are very happy in the way all of this is being handled and proud to be in the district. Thank you. Means the world. It really does. Tabassum, are there any conversations about pooled testing such as was implemented at UAlbany and other colleges in the region? Not active conversations, but it's a good topic to have. That seems to have been quite successful.
It did come up was it last Friday? And we had the regional call with Dr. Whalen.
Yes.
And it did come up as an idea. She is supportive of the idea. The infrastructure is not there to do that yet. But, you know, depending on where the next 6 weeks goes, I think they are aware that those may be options that we have to look into more seriously. And that would be starting with the health department.
So Renee has a question. Can you tell us anything about the lockdown earlier this week at the high school and what happened?
Mr. Core?
Yeah.
That was actually during the morning. It was at the high school. It involved a junior high school student. It was a lockout, not a lockdown. And the student, based on his behavior, we just locked out the school because we wanted to keep him safe along with the students. We did have to have an intervention with him. And because of that, we held our middle school classes a little bit longer while we worked with him and had him transported for additional support at a hospital.
So again, you know, we have to be very circumspect about the kind of information we discuss in these particular cases as well. Jenna said, we just finished our third e-learning day. Was there positive feedback from everyone? Was there high participation? Mr. Deneen, do you have anything to add on that at all?
Yeah, the feedback I've received so far has been positive. It's been able to give our in-person teachers a little bit of a look toward just posting work, crafting lessons that will be done in a different way than it is to their day-to-day. So far, so good. And fingers crossed that we don't have to do it too often because kids are in school.
And I would say, I misread your question, Jen. I thought you were asking, was there high participation in the parent-teacher conferences? And I want to say that there also was, because just like everything else, it is easier if you can get a half an hour at work to join a parent-teacher conference from Zoom while you're on a lunch break than trying to get to school on a half day. So something to think about for the future.
Renee has this question. If or when a family has test results and hasn't heard back or can't get a hold of the school nurse, can a student bring their negative results to school with them? And yes, they can. Brett notes that he emailed those results. Jenna Myers, I like the Zoom conferences and would support that in the future. Brett went more on emailing results, CC'd the principal and classroom teacher. Carly, Zoom parent-teacher conferences were awesome. Thank you. You're welcome, Renee. Thank you. Karen, these remote days are a little different because of the parent-teacher conferences, correct? There would be more FaceTime and Zooms, yes.
Correct.
Any additional questions? Well, here we are at Thanksgiving. And maybe there were times when some people might have doubted that we would be at Thanksgiving back in July and August, but here we are. And I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And I'm very grateful and thankful for your participation as a PAC, for our community participation. We're very grateful to our staff here in the district for the wonderful work they do with our students to help them learn, to provide them socially and emotionally with a safe environment. And, you know, in these times, there's a lot to be grateful for. So I wish to you all a very safe, happy, healthy, wonderful Thanksgiving, and wish you all the best. Happy Thanksgiving.